Sarah Martinez stepped into the women's locker room at the upscale fitness center, her muscles aching from an intense morning workout. The steam from the showers created a misty atmosphere as she made her way to an empty locker. She had chosen this gym specifically because it was far from the naval base where she worked, hoping for some anonymity and peace. As she began changing out of her workout clothes, she couldn't help but notice the group of women near the showers. They were all perfectly groomed, with expensive workout gear and manicured nails that had clearly never seen a day of real physical labor. Their conversation carried easily across the tiled space. "Did you see that woman doing pull-ups earlier?" one of them said, her voice dripping with disdain. "She was grunting like some kind of animal. So unladylike." Sarah realized they were talking about her. She had indeed been doing pull-ups, part of her daily routine to maintain the physical standards required for her job. She continued changing clothes, trying to ignore their comments. "And those scars on her arms?" another woman chimed in. "What kind of woman gets herself all beat up like that? Probably some kind of troublemaker." The scars they referenced were from various missions and training exercises. Each one told a story of sacrifice and service that these women would never understand. Sarah folded her workout clothes carefully, her jaw tightening slightly. "I bet she's one of those military wannabes," the first woman continued, now speaking louder as if she wanted Sarah to hear. "You know, those women who think they can do men's jobs. It's just sad, really. They try so hard to be something they're not." Sarah's hands paused for a moment as she reached for her towel. The irony wasn't lost on her. If only they knew that she had spent the last 15 years proving exactly what women could accomplish in the military. "Look at how she walks," observed a third woman. "All stiff and aggressive. No grace whatsoever. I feel sorry for any man who has to deal with that." The comments stung more than Sarah cared to admit. Despite her achievements and the respect she commanded in her professional life, moments like these reminded her of the constant scrutiny women in her position faced. She was always being judged, whether by civilians who didn't understand her world or by some colleagues who still questioned women's place in elite military units. She wrapped her towel around herself and headed toward the showers. As she passed the group, their conversation became even more pointed. "Excuse me," one of them called out directly to Sarah. "Are you some kind of security guard or something? You look like you could hurt someone." Sarah turned to face them, her expression calm and controlled. Years of military discipline had taught her to manage her emotions, even in frustrating situations. "I work for the government," she replied simply. This answer seemed to amuse them greatly. "Oh, government work," the woman said with a laugh. "Let me guess, you're a prison guard? Or maybe you work at the post office?" Their laughter echoed off the locker room walls. Sarah could see the assumptions they were making based on her appearance, her build, her demeanor. To them, she was just another woman who didn't fit their narrow definition of femininity. "Actually," Sarah said quietly, "I work in defense." "Defense?" another woman scoffed. "Like what, you're a secretary at some military office, filing papers and answering phones?" The dismissive tone in her voice made Sarah's training kick in even more. She had learned long ago that proving herself through words was often futile. Actions spoke louder, but this wasn't the time or place for demonstrations. "Something like that," Sarah replied, turning back toward the showers. "Well, whatever you do," the first woman called after her, "maybe try a different gym. This place is for people who actually care about looking good, not just being tough." Sarah stepped into the shower stall and let the hot water wash over her. The conversation continued behind her, though she tried to tune it out. She thought about her day ahead, the briefings she needed to attend, the decisions that would affect national security. These women had no idea that the person they were mocking had dedicated her life to protecting their freedom to make such comments. As she washed her hair, Sarah reflected on her journey. She had joined the Navy at 18, driven by a desire to serve her country and prove that women could excel in any field. The path hadn't been easy. She had faced skepticism, harassment, and discrimination at every level. But she had persevered, excelling in training, earning respect through competence, and gradually climbing the ranks. The SEAL training had been the ultimate test. When the program first opened to women, Sarah was among the first to volunteer. The physical demands were crushing, the mental pressure intense, but she had pushed through, not because she had something to prove to others, but because she knew she belonged there. Now, years later, she commanded respect from some of the toughest warriors in the world. Men who had initially doubted her capabilities now trusted her with their lives. She had earned her place through blood, sweat, and unwavering determination. But moments like this reminded her that outside the military bubble, many people still saw her as just another woman who didn't conform to their expectations. They couldn't see past the surface to understand the depth of her capabilities and achievements. Sarah finished her shower and returned to her locker. The group of women was still there, now discussing their lunch plans at some expensive restaurant. They glanced at her occasionally, making additional comments about her appearance and speculating about her life. "I bet she lives alone with a bunch of cats," one of them said. "Can you imagine trying to date someone like that? Probably drives a pickup truck and watches football all day," another added. Sarah dressed in her civilian clothes, simple jeans and a plain shirt that gave no indication of her true profession. She had learned to blend in when off-duty, to avoid the attention and questions that often came with revealing her military affiliation. As she prepared to leave, one of the women approached her directly. "Hey, I hope you don't mind me asking, but what's your story? You seem so intense." Sarah looked at her for a moment, considering how to respond. "I serve my country," she said simply. "Like in the army or something?" "Navy." The woman's expression shifted slightly, perhaps recognizing that she had been making assumptions. "Oh, well, that's good. Thank you for your service." The words felt hollow, a standard phrase people used when they didn't know what else to say. Sarah nodded politely and headed for the exit. As she walked to her car, Sarah thought about the encounter. She wasn't angry, not really. She had dealt with much worse than the comments of a few ignorant civilians, but it was a reminder of the disconnect between her professional world and civilian society. Tomorrow she would be back at the base, leading briefings and making decisions that could impact global security. Her colleagues would look to her for guidance and leadership, trusting her judgment implicitly. But today, she was just another woman in a locker room being judged by people who had no understanding of who she really was or what she had accomplished. The drive home gave her time to decompress. She lived in a modest house about 20 minutes from the base, a quiet neighborhood where she could maintain her privacy. Few of her neighbors knew about her work, which was exactly how she preferred it. Sarah pulled into her driveway and sat in her car for a moment, watching the suburban street where children played and families went about their daily routines. This was what she fought to protect, these moments of normalcy and peace that most people took for granted. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her executive officer, reminding her about an early morning briefing. Reality was calling her back to her other world. The one where her skills and leadership were not only recognized, but essential. As she walked toward her front door, Sarah smiled slightly. Let those women think whatever they wanted about her. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and responsibilities that they could never imagine. She had work to do, and people counting on her to do it well. The encounter at the gym would soon be forgotten, just another moment in a life full of more important things. But sometimes, these small interactions served as reminders of why her work mattered so much. In a world where people were free to make assumptions and speak their minds without fear, someone had to stand guard to protect that freedom. Sarah unlocked her door and stepped inside, ready to prepare for another day of serving her country, regardless of what anyone else thought about it. 3 weeks had passed since the incident at the gym, and Sarah had all but forgotten about the encounter. Her days were consumed with planning a critical mission in the Middle East, reviewing intelligence reports, and coordinating with various government agencies. The luxury of dwelling on civilian opinions was something she simply didn't have time for. It was a Tuesday evening when her phone rang. The caller ID showed her sister Maria's name, which was unusual since they typically texted rather than called. "Sarah, you need to come to Mom's fundraiser this Saturday," Maria said without preamble. "She's been planning this charity event for months, and she really wants the whole family there." Sarah rubbed her temples. Social events were always complicated for her. "What kind of fundraiser?" "It's for the Veterans Hospital. She's invited all her friends from the country club, and they're hoping to raise money for new medical equipment. Please tell me you can make it." The irony wasn't lost on Sarah. A fundraiser for veterans, organized by people who likely had no real understanding of military service. But her mother had worked hard on it, and Sarah knew it meant a lot to her. "I'll try to be there," Sarah said, "but you know how unpredictable my schedule can be." "I know, but Mom really wants you there. She's been bragging to all her friends about her daughter in the Navy." Sarah winced slightly. Her mother meant well, but she often shared more information than Sarah was comfortable with. "What exactly has she been telling people?" "Just that you work for the Navy, nothing specific. You know, Mom." Saturday arrived with a break in Sarah's schedule. The mission planning could wait one evening, and she decided to make an appearance at her mother's event. She chose a simple black dress and minimal jewelry, hoping to blend in with the crowd. The country club was elegant, with crystal chandeliers and marble floors. Sarah's mother, Elena Martinez, had transformed the main ballroom into a sophisticated fundraising venue. About 100 well-dressed people mingled around cocktail tables, chatting and admiring the silent auction items. "Mia!" Elena called out as soon as she spotted Sarah. "You made it! Come! I want you to meet everyone!" Before Sarah could protest, her mother was pulling her toward a group of women near the bar. Sarah's heart sank slightly as she recognized some of the faces from the gym. "Ladies, this is my daughter Sarah," Elena announced proudly. "The one I was telling you about who works for the Navy." The woman who had been the most vocal at the gym, Patricia, looked Sarah up and down with obvious surprise. "This is your daughter? She looks so different." Sarah was indeed dressed differently. The black dress softened her appearance, and without her workout clothes, the definition of her muscles was less obvious. Her hair was styled rather than pulled back in a practical ponytail. "Sarah works in naval intelligence," Elena continued, embellishing the truth slightly. "Very important work, very secret." Another woman from the gym group, Jennifer, stepped forward. "How interesting. What exactly do you do in naval intelligence?" Sarah chose her words carefully. "I analyze threats and coordinate responses, nothing too exciting." Patricia laughed, but there was a nervous edge to it. "Well, that's certainly different from what we thought you did. We actually met your daughter before, Elena, at the gym." Elena looked delighted. "Really? How wonderful. Sarah doesn't usually mention meeting people at her gym." The women exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Sarah decided to rescue them from their awkwardness. "It was just a brief encounter," Sarah said smoothly. "We didn't really talk much." Jennifer nodded enthusiastically. "Right, just a quick hello in the locker room." But Patricia seemed compelled to dig deeper. "So when you say you analyze threats, what kind of threats? Like computer hackers?" "Various kinds," Sarah replied. "Foreign intelligence, terrorist activities, cyber threats. It's pretty broad." The group was hanging on every word now. Their earlier dismissive attitude completely transformed. Sarah could see them reassessing everything they thought they knew about her. That must be so dangerous, said a third woman, Linda, who had been particularly cruel in her comments about Sarah's scars. Do you carry a gun? Sometimes, Sarah answered honestly, when the situation requires it. Elena beamed with pride. Sarah is very modest about her work. She's actually quite important in the Navy. They send her all over the world. This was getting into territory Sarah wasn't comfortable with. Mom, maybe we should let these ladies enjoy the party. But Patricia pressed on. All over the world, like on secret missions? Sarah's training kicked in, and she deflected with practiced ease. Mostly just boring meetings and paperwork. Nothing like the movies. Jennifer laughed nervously. Well, I feel much safer knowing people like you are protecting us. The words were similar to what she had said at the gym, but the tone was completely different. Now there was genuine respect, even awe, in her voice. Elena excused herself to check on the catering, leaving Sarah with the group of women. The conversation continued, but now they were asking respectful questions about her career and thanking her for her service. It was a complete reversal from their earlier encounter. I have to admit, Patricia said quietly, we may have misjudged you at the gym. We thought you were just some kind of... Well, we made assumptions. Sarah nodded graciously. It happens. People see what they expect to see. But you're so accomplished, Linda added, and here we were thinking you were just some rough woman trying to prove something. The irony was almost too much to bear. Sarah was exactly who she had been at the gym, but now that they had context, their entire perception had shifted. She hadn't changed, but their understanding of her had. As the evening progressed, word spread through the party about Elena's daughter who worked in naval intelligence. Sarah found herself surrounded by curious guests, all eager to hear about her experiences. She shared what she could without revealing classified information, focusing on the importance of military service and the dedication of the men and women who served. The fundraiser was a success, raising more money than Elena had hoped for. As the evening wound down, Patricia approached Sarah one more time. I owe you an apology, she said seriously. For what we said at the gym, we were completely out of line. Sarah studied her face, seeing genuine remorse. Thank you for saying that. It takes courage to admit when we're wrong. Can I ask you something? Patricia continued. Why didn't you say anything that day? You could have put us in our place. Sarah considered the question carefully. What would have been the point? You wouldn't have believed me anyway. People have to be ready to see the truth. Jennifer joined them, having overheard the conversation. We feel terrible about it. Is there anything we can do to make it up to you? Actually, there is, Sarah said thoughtfully. Your assumptions about me came from somewhere. Maybe think about what other assumptions you make about people based on how they look or act. The women nodded solemnly, clearly taking her words to heart. As Sarah prepared to leave, her mother pulled her aside. I'm so proud of you, mija. Not just for your work, but for how you handled yourself tonight. Those women were asking me all sorts of questions about you after you talked to them. What kind of questions? They wanted to know more about your career, your training. I think you really impressed them. Sarah smiled. They just needed to see me as a person instead of whatever they thought I was. Well, they certainly see you differently now. Patricia even asked if you might speak at their book club sometime. The thought of addressing a book club filled with women who had mocked her just weeks earlier was amusing. Maybe sometime, Sarah said diplomatically. Driving home, Sarah reflected on the evening. The transformation in those women's attitudes had been remarkable, but also troubling. She was the same person she had been at the gym, with the same skills, the same service record, the same dedication to her country. The only thing that had changed was their knowledge of her profession. It made her think about all the other service members who didn't get the luxury of dramatic revelations to change people's perceptions. The enlisted personnel, the veterans struggling to find work, the women and men who served quietly without recognition. They deserved the same respect regardless of their rank or the visibility of their contributions. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from her executive officer. New intelligence had come in about their upcoming mission. The real world was calling her back, reminding her that while civilian opinions mattered in their own way, her primary responsibility was to the mission and to the people under her command. She pulled into her driveway and sat for a moment, thinking about the strange turns life could take. 3 weeks ago, she had been mocked by strangers who saw her as a misfit. Tonight, those same strangers had praised her as a hero. The truth was, she was neither a misfit nor a hero in the dramatic sense. She was simply a professional doing her job to the best of her ability. As she walked to her front door, Sarah realized that the evening had taught her something important, too. She had been quick to judge those women as shallow and ignorant, but they had shown the capacity to grow and change when presented with new information. Perhaps everyone deserved the benefit of the doubt, even when first impressions were disappointing. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and responsibilities. But tonight, Sarah felt a small sense of satisfaction that barriers had been broken down and understanding had been reached. It wasn't the dramatic confrontation that movies might portray, but it was real progress in a world that often seemed divided by misunderstanding and prejudice. 2 months after the charity fundraiser, Sarah found herself standing in front of a packed auditorium at the local university. Patricia had followed through on her promise to think differently about assumptions and had somehow convinced the university's women's leadership program to invite Sarah as a guest speaker. The invitation had come at an interesting time. Sarah had just returned from a successful mission overseas, one that had required split-second decisions and flawless execution under extreme pressure. The transition from combat operations to civilian speaking engagements always felt surreal. Commander Martinez has graciously agreed to speak with us today about leadership in challenging environments, the program director announced to the audience of about 200 students, faculty, and community members. Sarah stepped to the podium, scanning the crowd. She spotted Patricia and Jennifer in the third row, along with several other women from the gym and the fundraiser. They looked nervous but eager, as if they still couldn't quite believe they had once dismissed her so completely. "Good afternoon," Sarah began, her voice carrying easily through the auditorium. "I want to start by telling you about a moment that changed how I think about perception and reality." She told them about the gym encounter, though she was careful not to embarrass anyone specific. Instead, she used it as a launching point to discuss the assumptions people make about leadership and capability. "I learned something important that day," Sarah continued. "Not just about how others see me, but about how I see others. It's easy to make judgments based on surface observations, but real leadership requires us to look deeper." A student in the front row raised her hand. "Commander, how did you get to where you are today? What was your path?" Sarah smiled. This was the question she had hoped for. "My path wasn't linear, and it certainly wasn't easy. I started as an enlisted sailor 20 years ago. I was 19 years old, unsure of myself, but determined to serve my country." She described her early years in the Navy, the challenges of proving herself in a male-dominated environment, the additional scrutiny she faced as a woman of color. She talked about the decision to pursue SEAL training when it became available to women. "The physical requirements were brutal," she explained. "We carried heavy packs for miles, swam in freezing water, endured sleep deprivation and constant pressure. But the mental challenge was even greater. We had to learn to trust each other completely, regardless of gender, background, or personal differences." Another hand shot up. "What was the hardest part of your training?" Sarah paused, remembering the countless moments of doubt and exhaustion. learning to believe in myself as much as my instructors believed in me. There were times I wanted to quit, times when the voice in my head said I didn't belong there, but I had teammates who refused to let me give up, and eventually I learned to silence that inner critic. She described the first time she led a mission, the responsibility of having other people's lives in her hands. She talked about making decisions under pressure, communicating clearly in chaotic situations, and the importance of earning respect through competence rather than demanding it through rank. Leadership isn't about being the loudest person in the room, Sarah said. It's about being the person others can depend on when everything goes wrong. An older woman in the audience stood up. Commander, you mentioned earning respect. How do you handle situations where people don't respect you initially? Sarah glanced at Patricia, who was looking down at her hands. I try to remember that respect is earned, not given. If someone doesn't respect me initially, that's information about their experiences and assumptions, not necessarily about my worth. My job is to demonstrate my competence through my actions, not to convince them with my words. She described situations where she had faced skepticism from new team members, foreign allies, and even superior officers. Consistency is key, she explained. If you perform at a high level consistently, people notice. If you treat others with respect even when they don't initially respect you, that makes an impression. The conversation shifted to current challenges facing women in leadership. Sarah was honest about the obstacles that still existed while emphasizing the progress that had been made. When I started my career, women weren't allowed in combat roles, she said. Now we serve in every capacity throughout the military, but progress doesn't happen automatically. It takes people willing to push boundaries, to prove capabilities, and to support each other along the way. A young woman near the back asked, how do you balance being seen as strong and capable while still being seen as feminine? Sarah considered the question carefully. I think that question assumes femininity and strength are opposites, which I don't believe is true. Some of the strongest people I know happen to be women who are also traditionally feminine. Others are women who express their gender differently. The key is being authentic to yourself while excelling at your job. She shared stories about women in her unit who approached leadership differently, but were equally effective. There's no single way to be a strong woman. The military taught me that diversity of thought and approach makes teams stronger. After the formal presentation, Sarah opened the floor for individual questions. Patricia approached the microphone, her hands visibly shaking. Commander Martinez, I owe you a public apology, she said, her voice carrying across the auditorium. I made terrible assumptions about you based on your appearance, and I said hurtful things. I want everyone here to know that you handled my ignorance with more grace than I deserved. The auditorium was completely quiet. Sarah could see other audience members looking confused, trying to understand what Patricia was referring to. Thank you for saying that, Sarah replied calmly. I think your willingness to admit you were wrong and to grow from the experience says a lot about your character. We all make mistakes in judgment sometimes. Patricia nodded, tears in her eyes. You taught me that strength comes in many forms, and that my narrow definition of what a woman should be was limiting and harmful. I hope other people can learn from my mistake without having to make it themselves. After the event, several people approached Sarah with questions and comments. Some were students interested in military careers. Others were community members thanking her for her service. Patricia waited until the crowd thinned before approaching. Thank you for not humiliating me up there, Patricia said quietly. You could have told everyone exactly what I said at the gym. Sarah shook her head. That wouldn't have served any purpose. You've already learned from the experience, and that's what matters. I've been thinking about what you said, about examining our assumptions, Patricia continued. I realized I make snap judgments about people all the time. I'm trying to do better. Jennifer joined them, along with Linda and a few other women from their group. "We've all been talking about it," Jennifer said. "About how wrong we were, but also about how we can be better allies to women like you." "Here's the thing," Sarah said gently. "I don't need you to be allies specifically to women like me. I need you to be allies to all women who are working hard to achieve their goals, regardless of whether they fit your expectations of what women should be like." The women nodded solemnly. Linda spoke up. "We've actually started a mentorship program for young women interested in non-traditional careers. We're partnering with the high school to connect girls with professional women in various fields." Sarah was genuinely impressed. "That sounds like meaningful work. Young women need to see examples of all the different ways they can contribute to society." As the group prepared to leave, Patricia had one final question. "Commander, do you think we can really change? I mean, fundamentally change how we see people?" Sarah considered this carefully. "I think people can change, but it requires constant effort. It's easy to fall back into old patterns of thinking. The key is to keep questioning your assumptions and to stay open to being wrong." Driving back to base, Sarah reflected on the day's events. The speaking engagement had gone better than she had expected. More importantly, she had seen genuine growth in people she had initially written off as shallow and prejudiced. Her phone rang as she pulled onto the highway. It was her commanding officer. "Martinez, we need you back early. New intel just came in about the situation in the South China Sea." Just like that, Sarah was back in her operational mindset. The civilian world receded as she focused on the mission ahead. "I'll be there in 30 minutes, sir." "Good. And Sarah, I heard about your speaking engagement today. Well done. That kind of community outreach is important for the Navy's reputation." After hanging up, Sarah smiled slightly. She had never sought out opportunities to be a public face for the military, but she was beginning to understand the importance of the role. If her experiences could help people see past their assumptions and stereotypes, then it was time well spent. The next few days would be consumed with mission planning and operational details. But tonight, Sarah felt a sense of completion about the journey that had started with cruel comments in a gym locker room. What had begun as a moment of civilian ignorance had evolved into an opportunity for education and growth. She thought about the young women in the audience, the students who might now consider military careers they had never imagined before. She thought about Patricia and her friends, who were channeling their newfound awareness into positive action. And she thought about her own growth, from someone who had been quick to judge others to someone who understood the importance of giving people room to evolve. As Sarah drove through the base gates, she was already transitioning back to Commander Martinez, the SEAL who made life and death decisions in service of her country. But she carried with her the knowledge that her service extended beyond military operations. Sometimes the most important missions happened in civilian auditoriums, in conversations that challenged assumptions and opened minds. The guard at the gate saluted as she passed through. In a few hours, she would be leading a briefing on national security issues that could affect millions of lives. Tomorrow, she might be deployed to a dangerous situation halfway around the world. But today, she had also served her country by showing a room full of people what leadership really looked like, regardless of their expectations or preconceptions. Sarah parked her car and headed toward the operations center, ready for whatever challenge awaited her next. The mission continued in all its many forms.